Now tonight, we're going to continue on this about the Christian virtues, or sometimes called the Christian graces, from 2 Peter 1, verses 5 through 7. And we're going to add to faith virtue. Now, the way we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing some word studies, and I'll be teaching a little bit about how to do word studies as we get into this, but we want to understand virtue. Now, here's the text. Add to your faith virtue. That's where we'll be. We're going to go down this list. And the virtue knowledge, and the knowledge temperance, and the temperance patience, and the patience godliness, and the godliness brotherly kindness, and the brotherly kindness charity. You can think of this as character building lessons. Christianity makes new men and new women out of us, and it does that by teaching us these kinds of things that we incorporate into who we are as a person and standing before God. So we're going to be talking about virtue tonight. But before we do, I want to talk about add. That is a very simple English word. You might think of it in terms of mathematics. When I think of add, I usually think of the plus sign. And so you've got faith plus virtue, and you can just add pluses down through there. But it's really a much more involved word than what we see in the English. Now, I don't know if your translation will say this or not, but I've noticed some translations, supply. That gets a little closer to the word, but even then, that just sounds kind of almost like a business thing. I'm gonna supply this, but it is to abundantly supply. Now that sounds like a lot more than add, doesn't it? And in fact, I checked a number of translations. I haven't seen anyone that did this. But as you look into the use and meaning of that word, you might be able to use the word lavish. Lavish virtue upon your faith. That's how powerful that word is. Let me show you how it's used to show I can justify that by looking at this. The word is epicorrigio, if I'm saying that right, epicorrigio. Well, that epi, that kind of magnifies a word. When you see that in the Greek, epi, that kind of makes whatever corrigio mean epicorrigio. I mean, this is in abundance of that. And you see that C-H-O-R? That is the root of the word. See, Greek words have roots to them. Now, a lot of English words too. But you want to tap into the meaning of the word, you go back to the root. And that root finds its way around in other languages. That's Old Greek root. You've heard the word chorus, C-H-O-R. That's the root. Oh, choreography. There's the root. And in fact, the word epicorrego, and not in the New Testament, but outside the New Testament, it can be used for the choir director. That's a strange thing, isn't it? How does that apply then? How does that get us back to add? Well, among the ancient Greeks, what they would do, if there was to be some kind of great celebration or some kind of great performance coming, some citizen of the community said, come to this production. I'm going to supply them everything they need to have a grand production. And then out of the abundance of their benevolence toward their community. They would make sure that everyone in this choir or this production or whatever, they would have everything they need. And it was considered a mark of honor to just lavish upon them all that they would need. That's what's behind that word. Does that change the meaning of add just a little bit? It really does color it, doesn't it? That's why I say lavish. Lavish upon your faith virtue. Now, you can kind of see this when we read the account of Luke 15:22 through 25. The prodigal son returns. And the father, sometimes we say he pulls out all stops. There's no end to what he's going to do to supply what is needed to celebrate the return of his son. And so his father said to his servants, bring forth the best robe and put it on me, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they begin to be merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. The word dancing, choros. He heard some kind of great event going on, something beyond the ordinary. Dancing would have been included in that, just the celebration, but it's really talking about everything that is going on here. And the father was doing the epikorego here. There was no end to what he would do to supply for this joyful celebration of his son's return. You might see this sometime at weddings where it looks like, boy, they really went over the top on that wedding. And that's what they're doing, the epikorego. So I might start using that. I kind of like the way I came up with that lavish, trying to find a word. I asked Lori to help me with words, and we came up with something, and we got lavish. Lavish upon your faith virtue. That just speaks so much more in depth than just our word add. Not that add is wrong, but it doesn't capture the essence of what was behind that word when it said add to your faith virtue. But now let's look at the word virtue. What is virtue? Now here's how you do a word study. The quick way is to go to a lexicon. You see, a lexicon, these lexicographers, what they do, they study the Greek words, and it's like a dictionary. A dictionary defines a word. What a lexicon does is it tells you how the word is used. Well, that's very similar to a definition, isn't it? Tells you how the word is used. Remember when we said add to your faith? The word faith, or believe, the verb form of that word, 500 times in the New Testament. Why? To go through, and I tried to show the different ways that word faith is used. When we come to this word, virtue, it's used 5 times. 5 times. Now, you can go to your Bible and look up that word in each place it is used and see how it's used in those 5 places. You don't have to depend on the lexicographers here. They might guide you and see what they think, but you can read it yourself and see what you think about that word. Now, here are the 5 places the word is used. Look at that list. 2 of the times it's used in our text, 1 Peter 1:5. Add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge. That's twice. The second time it's used, the third time, it's right in that same context, 1 Peter chapter 1. His divine power hath given us all things that pertain unto life and godliness through the knowledge of him that called us to glory and virtue. What's that? Well, then it says, whereby are given to us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust, and besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge. Hard to tell from that what the word means. All right, let's go to the next use. The next time it is used, it's also used by Peter, only it's in 1 Peter. And in the King James Version, it's translated praises. Now that's going to help us a little bit. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. I don't know why they didn't say the word virtues. That's the word. Same word. It's just translated praises here. But we are called to show forth his virtues. Some quality of Christ that we are to exhibit. Well, that helps us a little bit. The only other place it is used, it's the one time it's used, not by Peter, is when it's used by Paul. And it's in good company. Philippians 4 and verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any virtue. If there be any praise, think on these things. These things, this true, honest, just, pure, lovely, good report. These are things defined by that word virtue. Included, if there be any virtue, well, that's what these are, things of virtue. Now, what does that mean? If all we had was the use of that word in the New Testament, it would be difficult to determine its significance. Now, here's something that lexicographers can do that I don't know how to do yet. Maybe someday I'll figure it out, but I'm going to depend on them for this right now. They'll go outside the New Testament. How is the word used in the Koine Greek, which was the Greek of the New Testament? How is that word used outside the New Testament? Can that shed light on how it's used in the New Testament? And so lexicographers can help with that. But there's something else we can do. There's something else. You can go to the root and see where that word shows up otherwise. And I'm going to take you on an interesting little journey following the root of the word that gives us virtue. There's usually pictures behind the use of a word. The word virtue is itself a noun, but the lexicographers tell me it's associated with this word arson, which means male. And that's an adjective. This particular word for male is an adjective. And then that comes from a verb, areo, which means to lift. You see, men are distinguished from women one way, and I know there's exceptions to this, but one way is the upper body strength. The strength you use to lift things. And men just have a different arrangement or set of muscles and strength in their upper body than women usually. When they say men are stronger than women, that's what they're usually talking about, the upper body strength. Now, I know a doctor that says men might be stronger than women, but women are tougher. And I think he's seen examples of that on how they combat illness and problems. Now, women are tougher, but men have stronger upper body strength. So I put Superman down there to kind of illustrate that. You see that chest he's got? He's lifting something, okay? And that really shows off the upper body strength. It's because of those muscles used to lift that the word is associated with male. And then virtue. There's strength in that word. And so you start looking up the way the word is used and the meaning of the word, and here's some things you will find. Virtue has to do with manliness. What kind of manliness? What's a manliness of strength? Well, what kind of strength? Moral strength. We're not talking about physical strength now. We're talking about a moral quality, moral strength. And maybe better than that, the moral courage and the absolute uncompromising moral standards. That's where we have virtue. Virtue is that determination to do the treacherous right thing instead of the safe, easy thing. And you do it because it's right. And I tell you what, men, you know that one of the most ugly words you heard when you were in your youth, they could call you all kind of ugly things, but one thing that'd get your dander up real quick is if someone called you a sissy. That hits right to the heart of your manliness, and you wouldn't stand for that. Well, this kind of manliness, this kind of passion that is in man that wants to demonstrate he is a man of God. We're talking about virtue. Now, I'm going to talk about another man that captured this idea, and this is a quite popular. I haven't really read a lot from him, and one of the reasons is there's so many read so much from him that I feel like, well, I'm going to do something different. But I couldn't ignore this. C.S. Lewis, you've heard of him, wrote many, many wonderful things. He wrote an essay on the abolition of man. And what he's talking about is what is the consequences of saying God doesn't matter and there's no absolute moral standards. What is that doing to men? Well, here's what it's doing, and men, they're not just male as men, but this would include women too. But what's this doing? And one of the things he said was, and he's quite expressive in his writing, is that the head rules the belly through the chest. When you think of chest, now you're thinking of the virtue. What are you talking about? You see, we have appetites, don't we? Fleshly appetites. How do we master them? Bring them under control and do what is right in regard to fleshly appetites. I want you to remember that for every fleshly appetite that we have, God has provided a right way to satisfy that. But the devil's provided a lot of perverted and wrong ways. How do you satisfy the fleshly appetites? You do it the right way. Well, how do you govern that, the belly? How do you govern the appetite? Well, there's the intellect. You got to know better. You got to learn right from wrong. And then by knowing what's right from wrong, you got to choose. But just knowing what is right is not enough to master the appetite. There's got to be a passion. And we're talking about here a passion to do right. A passion to live before God like Enoch did in a manner that is pleasing to Him. And you have simply determined, this is what I'm going to do. And then you learn what is right, and the passion for right is what gives you the strength to do it. And so you can say the intellect governs the appetite through the passion. That's what C.S. Lewis meant when he said the head rules the belly through the chest. And then if you do away with God and you do away with the absolute moral standards that come with the idea of God, here's what he says about that. In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chest and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful. Well, now that's C.S. Lewis. And I'm not quoting C.S. Lewis because he's the authority and he is right. If he's right here, it's not because he's C.S. Lewis. He's tapped into something that is already right and he's expressing it. I'm doing this to help you get the idea of what virtue is. And it has to do with the strength that is moral strength. So I'm going to do the right thing. Now, go to the Old Testament. Virtue is a manly virtue, isn't it? Looking just at the word in the English Bible, I'm still talking about the King James Version now because that's what I use. The word virtue is not found many times in the Old Testament, but every time it is found, it has to do with the strength of women. Let me tell you the story of Ruth. You remember how she was a Moabitess, and her mother Naomi went to Moab, and one of her sons married Ruth. Well, he died. And Naomi returns to Bethlehem, and Ruth returns with her, sacrificing her own self, leaving her family. Our God shall be my God, and my people my people. And she is going to honor the commitment she'd had to her son by honoring her mother-in-law. And she follows her to Bethlehem, and she's taking care of her there. And Ruth is a bitter woman. Naomi's a bitter woman. But Ruth is looking after her. Now, she gleaned in the fields of Boaz. And Boaz told Ruth, now you glean in my fields and don't go into any other fields. And he made sure she had plenty to eat and plenty to glean. And Ruth says, why do you show this kindness to me? Here's what Boaz said. It hath been fully showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thy husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother and the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not hithertofore. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel. Notice these words, under whose wings thou art come to trust. You can just see Ruth, the picture here of Ruth coming up to the Lord and expect the Lord to spread his wings over her and protect her as a mother bird might do her chicks or protect her nest. She's come under the Lord's wings for her trust. Remember that. That's going to help explain something that takes place later. You see, Naomi knows Boaz is a near kinsman, and he can take care of Ruth. He can marry her. And so Naomi tells Ruth, you go to Boaz and do what I say. And she's going to work this out like the matchmaker. Well, she comes to Boaz at night. And it says in Ruth 3, I'm going to read 7 through 11. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry. He went to lie down at the end of a heap of corn, and she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down. And it came to pass at midnight that the man was afraid and turned himself. Behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, who art thou? And she answered, I am Ruth, thy handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thy handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. Those words, spread thy skirt over me, are the words Boaz had used to Ruth when he said, under whose wings thou art come to trust. Can you associate the spreading of the wings with the spreading of the skirt? In the Hebrew, the words are the same. They're translated different here because of context, but I wish the translators had left them the same so we could make that connection. Boaz said, Ruth, you've come under the Lord's wings. And Ruth says, Boaz, you let me under your wing. You be the Lord's wing over me. Well, Boaz responds, and notice how he responds. He said, blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter. Thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not the young men, whether poor or rich. That's why people read this and think, well, Boaz must have been the older man here, and Ruth somewhat younger than him. But she's coming to Boaz, and then it says, and now, my daughter, fear not. I will do to thee all that thou requirest, for all the city of my people doth know thou art a virtuous woman. How was she a virtuous woman? Because with much nobility, she sacrificed any advantage she had in Moab to take care of her grieving mother-in-law and to follow her to Bethlehem to be the one to care for her. That kind of self-sacrifice, that determination to say, no, I'm going to do that which is most honorable, is virtue. Show you where else it's used. It's in the book of Proverbs. And men are going to be able to relate to this, some with joy and some with sorrow. Proverbs 12 and verse 4, a virtuous woman is a crown to her husband. Amen, men? Isn't that right? But she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. I know some men that would say, amen, because she has made him so ashamed. And that woman is described in Proverbs 31. Who can find a virtuous woman? Her price is far above rubies. Now, we're going to look at this woman, but at the end of this, it's going to tell us just what a virtuous woman is. Now, I'm going to read this and think, how in the world is this woman doing all this? The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of his life. She seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. She's like the merchant ships and bringeth her food from afar. She riseth while it is also yet night and giveth meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. She considereth a field and buyeth it with the fruit of her hands. She planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle and her hands to the distaff. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor. Yea, she reacheth forth her hand to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow, for her household, for all her household is clothed in scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth the girdles to the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done virtue. She's the virtuous woman, but in regards to virtue, it says, thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her own work praise her in the gates. Who's the virtuous woman? How is this woman, how can she do all this? How in the world, how can any woman have all that much going on and taking care of it all? And it just looks like, if I was a woman reading that, I'd be a little intimidated. How is this woman driven to be all these things? She fears the Lord. That's her motivation. That spurs her on. It's her standing with God that is critical to her. That's why she's virtuous. It has to do with the fear of the Lord. It's not a fear of incurring his displeasure, but a respect for God, to want to be like Enoch was when he had this testimony that he pleased the Lord. That is the essence of virtue. Now, that's the only time it's used in the Old Testament. There's other times it could have been used. I think of Joseph. Remember what he said to Potiphar's wife? How can I do this thing and sin against God? Joseph had a chest. He had a passion, a virtue that would not allow him to cross a line that would bring God's displeasure upon him. He was going to be a man of God. And there's a man in the New Testament. And the word virtue is used in regard to this man in the New Testament. And we find it in 1 Peter 2 and verse 9. That ye should show forth the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. That's Jesus, the virtuous man. We find it again in 2 Peter 1 and verse 3. His divine power hath given us all things that pertain unto life and godliness through the knowledge of him that called us to glory and virtue. The virtuous man here is Jesus. Look what he did. He went about doing good. He's a man of compassion. He says, I've come to do my Father's will. Let this cup pass from me. But if it be thy will that I drink of this cup, thy will be done. And he endured the cross, despising the shame, because he was virtuous. And that's what we need to lavish on our faith. Virtue. Faith. We believe. But with that faith, we need to embed in the deepest passions of our being, we're going to do what's right, regardless of consequences. The most important thing to me is my standing with God. I'm not just going to be a man. I'm going to be a man of God. And women with that same quality. I'm going to be a woman of God. And when we have that passion, we have that virtue. So add to your faith virtue. Next Sunday night, we're going to talk about knowledge. That's a little different word too. It's a full knowledge, and we'll talk about the significance of that and do a word study there. And add to your faith virtue. It's a virtue that distinguishes someone and they're standing before God that is recognized in this world. And Christians, above all people, in following Christ, need to follow him in this passion of virtue. And it'll lift us up, won't it? It'll lift us up to do so. If you need to come to Christ tonight, be baptized into Christ, or as a Christian to return to him, if there's special need of prayer, let that be known as we sing this invitation song.